It's my pleasure to welcome our guest speaker this evening, Blaine Marchand. Blaine is a gardener and an avid award-winning author. He and his partner own a Second Empire-style schoolhouse in Renfrew County. They have over 700 peonies, 1,000 daylilies, as well as a Canadian heritage apple orchard and a collection of Canadian lilacs over the 3 acres. Blaine was a former president of the Canadian Peony Society and the Ottawa Horticultural Society. He is currently a board member of the Friends of the Central Experimental Farm in Ottawa. He also has an extensive garden at his home in Ottawa. Blaine's other passion is poetry. His poetry and prose have appeared in magazines and e-zines across Canada, the US, New Zealand, India, and Pakistan. He has 6 books of poetry, a young adult novel, and a work of nonfiction published. His full-length manuscript of poems entitled Becoming History will be published this fall. Blaine was the president of the League of Canadian Poets from 1991 to 1993 and is still active in various capacities. In his work life, Blaine worked for the Canadian International Development Agency for over 30 years, and he traveled to many developing nations. He ended his career with a 2-year posting to Pakistan. Blaine, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Danielle. I'm also, I'm having the presentation fill the screen rather than seeing me as well. I'll close the screen at the end of the session for the question and answers. Also, for some reason, my images of the peonies seem to have grown. So the names of the peony on each slide, in some cases, are blocked. So I'll just tell you visually what it is. Tonight's talk is Peonies, Myths, and Realities. And it will be a general overview of peonies. The first peony we see, this white one, is Itoh. Now, in terms of myths, one of the myths that I have come across in when I give presentations or when I've been at events where people know that I talk about peonies or I have peonies, they say, you know, my grandma always had peonies and they're pink, red, and white. They always say, it always rains when they bloom, which is true. But there is a reason which I'll explain in the presentation is when it rains, why they always fall over. And that's exactly what the next slide is. They flop over and have such a short bloom time. So this presentation will give you the realities. And this particular peony that you can see is called Pico. The name is you can see at the top. Peonies, as the myth says, you know, about my grandmother, they're an old-fashioned garden perennial, and they can live up to 50 years or more than 50 years. And often when you're at old farmsteads, you will find clumps of peonies still surviving among the grass. They're incredibly hardy once they get going and are well established. Peonies grow in the Northern Hemisphere. For example, you will not find them in a country like Pakistan, although there is a species peony called Peony amodii, which does grow in the foothills of the Himalayas. And as you probably know, for centuries, peonies were culturally significant in China. And this particular peony that the slide is of, Peony albiflora, is a very important peony for breeding purposes. Now, the Peony lactiflora, which is a species of a Chinese peony, was introduced to Europe by plant hunters in the mid 18th century, and it was the parent plant for many of the varieties known today. And this is Peonia lactiflora. Now, the reason why they flop over is because peonies were originally grown as to be cut flowers in Europe. So the importance for the breeders was the fragrance, not stem strength. Modern peonies, they actually are breeding more stem strength into this. And as you can see, this peony here is Aegilis superba. Now today, there are over 5,000 named varieties of herbaceous peonies. Herbaceous peonies means it's a cross between lactiflora and another peony. And it's not just lactiflora and other peonies, because they're also crossbreeding different kinds of herbaceous peonies as well, just to be clear about that. This particular peony that you see on this slide is called watermelon wine. Now, the one things that peonies do require is well-drained soil, and they prefer a sunny location of 4 to 6 hours. And they don't like to be standing in water or have their roots in water. So if you can get a well-drained soil when you're preparing the peony bed, it's very important. The 4 to 6 hours, there's a little bit of flexibility of that, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. This particular peony that you can see is Defender. It was hybridized by a hybridizer called Percy Saunders, who was the son of William Saunders of the experimental farm. William Saunders was the first director of the experimental farm here in Ottawa, and he was an amateur botanist and hybridizer, and he taught his son Percy a good deal. Now, in terms of fragrance, there are 4 distinct fragrances in peonies: rose, lemon, honey, and musk. And this particular peony that you can see on the slide is called Coral and Gold. The introduction of coral peonies was very popular. And if you have a coral peony and you dig it up and you leave a piece of root in the ground, it will soon grow and be a peony unto its own. It's what is called adventitious. Now, in terms of the color, it's true, originally they were white, pink, and red. And these 2 peonies that you can see on the screen are Sarah Bernhardt and Festiva Maxima. Festiva Maxima being the one with the white one with the red flecks. They are probably the most popular peony through the centuries. They're very reliable, very hardy, and very floriferous. But with hybridization, and thanks to Percy Saunders, he created new colors such as yellow, scarlet, and crimson. His color range is amazing. And this particular peony that you can see here, you can see the name Skylark. This is one of Percy Saunders' introductions. Now, in terms of flower types, there are many flower types. Just before we get into that, I just want to say that this particular slide is an example of Moonrise, which is another Percy Saunders introduction. So we have the ones that most people are familiar with, the doubles, where you have multiple rows of petals emerging from a crown, and the crown is completely covered by petals. Then there are semi-doubles, which means that essentially there's more than one row of petals and the crown is exposed and it's never fully double. This particular peony that you can see here is called Nice Gal. Okay, this one also covered the text. I'm sorry about that. Another type of peony is anemone, which is towards a double, but with a center bomb of petaloids, which are the white petals in the center. And they're actually called petaloids. They're not full petals, so they're smaller petals. And they're often, if you notice, they're ragged, and that's often the case. This particular peony is called Bowl of Beauty, and it's another one that's very popular through the centuries. Then we have the Japanese, which is doubling the single form. As you can see in the illustration, there's more than there's a second row of petals, and they're around a very small mound of petals, which are the sort of pink or red ones. This peony is called Itoh, and it is really a magnificent peony. If you ever come across it at a sale or at a nursery, I would recommend highly this peony. And then there are single ones, which is just basically one row of large petals. This is another one of Percy Saunders called Firelight. I'll just point out another hallmark of Percy Saunders peonies are what are called flares. So if you look in the center where you have the stamens and the little the pistils, you can see the red flares coming out from the center. So those often occur on his peonies. Okay, again, I apologize. This photograph has covered the text. So in addition to herbaceous peonies, there are other types. And I'm going to begin with tree peonies. This is another Saunders introduction. This one is called Banquet. And again, I apologize. Tree peonies, and they're not really trees, they're more shrubs. And they grow up to 150 centimeters in height on woody stems. And they have a few diseases. This particular peony you can see here is called Guardian of the Monastery. Now, tree peonies have beautiful foliage over 3 seasons, and there's a wide variety of colors and shapes. This yellow peony is called Alice Harding. In terms of tree peonies, you can reproduce them from seed. You can grow them from seed, but mostly when you buy them at nurseries, they're grafted to a herbaceous peony. Now, when they are grafted, what is very important is that you plant the graft 4 inches below the soil, because what you want to have is what you want to occur is that the portion above the graft send out its own roots. And so this encourages. It's very similar to apple trees. Because apples are grafted onto a stalk, you have to plant it to a certain depth so that the actual apple tree you want will send out roots. So this is very important, to plant the graft 4 inches below soil. What sometimes can happen with tree peonies, and it can happen many years after you've actually planted them and all you've got is tree peony flowers, sometimes what happens is the herbaceous peony that it's been grafted to will send up a shoot. And you can tell the difference between the herbaceous peony shoot and the tree peonies by their leaves. What you want to do when that occurs is you put your hand right down to the graft along the herbaceous peony shoot, and you give it a tug and pull it out. If you do not do this, what will happen is the herbaceous peony will completely overtake the tree peony, and the tree peony will die. And I've had cases where people have told me, I don't know what's happening with my tree peony. And I look at it and say, it's not a tree peony, it's a herbaceous peony. Even one day I was at Richie's on Windmill Drive, and they had tree peonies for sale. And I called over one of the workers and I said, "You're selling them as trees peonies, but these two, the herbaceous peony has overtaken them. So they're no longer tree peonies. You should be aware of that." And often the herbaceous peony flower is not particularly an attractive flower. So going back to the woody stems, sorry, you, unlike herbaceous peonies, which you cut back and leave a stem of about 2 inches, woody tree peonies, you leave the woody stems through the winter. You can tie the branches together to protect them against wet snow or heavy ice. But I will say that in Osceola, which is an hour and 15 minutes northwest of Ottawa, and which is in a zone colder than Ottawa, we have a number of tree peonies. We do not protect them, and they come back year after year after year. Now I'm going to talk about another type of peony, which is called intersectional peony, or Itohs. And they're a cross between a herbaceous peony and a tree peony. And they were created by a Dr. Tochi Itoh. And he was told that this was impossible to do intersectional peonies, to have a cross between 2 different types of peonies, in this case, herbaceous and tree peony. But he was persistent and he kept trying. And he finally succeeded with 5 that germinated and worked. And this is one of them. This is called Yellow Emperor. However, Dr. Itoh actually died before the first flower occurred. So he actually never saw the blossoms that he tried so hard to create. Now, originally, in terms of tree peonies, yellow was the most common color, but now they come in all different colors and shades. This particular peony that you can see on the screen is called Barcella, and it is the most famous, and it's considered the most beautiful tree peony, or Itoh rather, excuse me. Now, because they're a combination of a tree peony and a herbaceous peony, the flowers are like the tree peony. So they're very large. They're very magnificent in a different way than herbaceous peonies are. But the foliage of Itohs is herbaceous in habit. And that means in the autumn, what you do is you cut back the stems to about 2 inches above the ground. However, I have noticed that with Itohs, often the stem that is above the ground, you will have eyes appear. And the eyes are the growth that comes. So they're a little bit like the tree peony, in that with tree peonies, they're woody stems and the branches come out from the woody stems. And with the Itohs, this happens on short stems. So they haven't been affected very much by our winters, I have found, and they often appear above ground. Now the stalk is woodier than the herbaceous peony, and the flower remains upright as it is with the tree peonies. But again, as I said, you cut them back in the autumn. This particular peony is Cora Louise. Now, everybody says peonies have such a short bloom season. In fact, it's like any plant or any flowering plant. There's an early, a mid, and a late flower. So in terms of peonies, you actually have 7 weeks. And when I tell people this, they don't believe me, but it's actually true. So we're going to talk about that now. So this particular peony here is Tenafolia, which is also sometimes known as fernleaf peony. And if you look at the photograph underneath the blossom, you can see a very finely cut leaf structure, and that's why it's called fern leaf. This particular one is a single tenafolia. There is also a double, which is less common and more expensive. So in terms of the double tenafolia, you can play close to $100 for a root. Now going back to the blooming season, the first week, it's mostly species and single hybrids that bloom, and that represents about 2.4 of the peonies that will bloom at this period of time. This particular peony is called veitchii. It's a species peony, and it's a very beautiful peony because it has kind of a bush shape to it. It's not a tree peony, but it has a kind of bush shape to it, and you get all of these really incredibly beautiful mauve flowers. Week 2, you again continue with the species, the singles, and then hybrids of the fern leaf. So these two particular ones here on the screen are wind chimes and early scout. So you can see if you look at the foliage, it's smaller, particularly the early scout, which is on my right, with the two bright red blossoms. They're larger than wind chimes. And in week 2, roughly 4.8% of peony bloom. In week 3, the hybrids, so the herbaceous peonies that have been hybridized, and the tree peonies begin to flower. And in week 7, you have 7.4% of the blossom occurring. And this particular one is a Japanese tree peony. Week 4, is that right? Yeah, week 4. So you can see how now it's increasing 17.1%. And the tree peonies, the semi-doubles and the doubles begin to flower. This particular peony, which is a herbaceous peony, is called polyphae. Week 5, now this is considered the sort of center of the blooming period. Even though it's 7 weeks, this is when it's considered sort of at its midpoint. So you have the hybrids at their peak and the Japanese begin. There is a peony called red charm, and that usually marks the center point. When it's in bloom, it's the center point of the blooming period. So it's sort of between week 4 and week 5. Now, this is when the really fragrant double peonies begin to bloom in week 6. And there's 18% of these peonies fall into this category. And this particular one, as you can see on the screen, is called Nick Shaler. Week 7. And this is the final doubles finish. This particular peony that you can see is called Louise Lossing. It's a Canadian peony that was bred in Canada, down near Toronto, sort of between Tweed and Peterborough by a woman. It's the only peony that she hybridized. And in Osceola, it is our last peony that blooms. So in Osceola, our first peonies start around the middle to the second, third, or fourth week. And Louise Lossing usually blooms in July. Now, some general information on the care of tree peonies. So this illustration here is an Itoh hybrid peony. And if you look at the diagram, you can see what are called buds or eyes, as opposed to the stem. And this, again, is an example of how with the Itohs, the buds can appear on the stem, but buds will also appear below ground by the crown. And notice how the roots are spread out. That's very important if you could do that. Now, peony stalks start to come up in early spring. And you've probably seen in your own garden, if you have peonies, they're really growing at this time of the year. And, you know, they can withstand the cold and the frost quite well. I want to point out sort of, they have different colors at this time of year. Some can be the shade on the slide. Others can be much more red. Now, the foliage can be quite varied, and that's why I have these two, so that you can see some are quite green and some have more tendency to be to the red. I haven't done enough study to determine whether or not it has to do with the color of the peony. However, the foliage can be quite varied and is often very beautiful in the fall as well. And people are often in a hurry to cut down the peonies in the fall. But I think, to me, that's part of the attractiveness of the peonies, is when they have these different colors in the fall. So I like to leave them up as long as possible. When planting peonies, the recommended spacing is 3 feet to allow for air circulation. And there is a need to keep the space around the peony stems weeded, which can often be a chore, I find. Now, it's true in terms of staking that for older varieties, you do have to stake them during blooming time. Modern varieties, as I said earlier, have stronger stems. And this is an example of one with a stronger stem called Alini Bell. And I love its dark red, almost garnet color. Now, the best time to plant peonies is in September to October, but I have planted them as late as November. But that year it was fairly mild. So, but really what it is you want to plant them during this period because you want to give the roots enough time to grow. And it's not so much the thick roots that you find, but coming off thick roots, what it develops is almost fine wires or filaments. And these are the feeder roots. And that's what you want it to have time enough to develop. A lot of people want to plant peonies in the summer because they buy them from the nurseries or the superstore nurseries, and they want to get them in the ground. And I tell them what is preferable is just dig a hole, put the pot in, let the peony go through the summer, and then lift it in the fall and cut it back and trim the roots a bit, and then plant it at that point. It really is the optimum time. So as I was saying, in terms of preparing, you cut the foliage of peonies to about 2 inches above the ground level in the autumn. And this allows you to just know where exactly the peony is. So, but you do not do that with tree peonies, as I said earlier. In terms of species peony, they can be planted in shade or wood gardens. They do not mind less sun because they bloom in the spring, early in the spring. Often they bloom just sort of before the canopy of the trees gets really heavy. So they do get more sun than people sometimes think. And again, you plant the eyes 2 inches below soil level. For herbaceous peonies, again, you plant the eyes 2 inches below soil. They do like full sun, 4 to 6 hours, although some will tolerate light shade. So it really, I mean, the herbaceous are the one that require the most. Now, as I was talking about tree peonies earlier, they're often grafted. And I just want to point out on the diagram underneath soil level, you'll see a little white band. And when you buy them from nurseries, there's usually that little white band and it has the name of the peony on it. So you want to make sure it tells you where the graft is. So, so what you want to do is you want to make sure you've got 4, it says 4 to 6, but 4 is sufficient in terms of the graft union, which is here. So the bottom part, I'm pointing this out, I don't know if you can see me pointing it out, but the bottom part is the herbaceous peony that they have grafted it to. So you want it 4 to 6 inches, that graft point 4 to 6 inches below the soil level. And you do not cut tree peonies back in autumn. Now, and as I said earlier, with Itohs, they're treated like herbaceous peonies. You cut back the foliage, and you plant the eyes 2 inches below the soil level. But again, as I said earlier, I'm sorry I'm repeating this, that often with the Itohs, you will have eyes appear above ground on the stems. Not always, but sometimes. And this is what this slide is about. This particular peony is Lilac Morning. It's a beautiful, beautiful, vibrant mauve, and I really highly recommend this one if you ever see it. Now, peonies have a few diseases. Botrytis is probably the most common, and you will see that in the spring. What will happen is the peonies stems will come up and then they'll flop over. So on the left-hand side, you'll notice one lying on the ground. On the right-hand side, you will notice if you look at it, just where it's been cut off, there is gray, kind of like a gray mold. And the only thing you can do is you can remove it. And when you're working around the peony through the summer, just make sure you're constantly sort of clawing the soil. Don't throw botrytis infected stems into the compost, because it is a mold, it will spread into the compost. So you just basically put them in the garbage. Now, the other big thing that does occur is powdery mildew. And to be honest, because we have so many peonies, I can't figure this out. Some obviously are more prone to powdery mildew than others, because we have long rows of peony gardens. And what happens is you can have the row of 13, and 2 in the 13 will have powdery mildew and the others won't. So it's a spore that goes, but I think some peonies are more susceptible to it. What I have heard is a deterrent for powdery mildew is actually Dawn dish detergent. So you spray it on the peony and it will prevent it from forming powdery mildew. Now, often I get asked about ants and why are ants on peonies and how do you get rid of them? Personally, to me, ants are just part of nature. The reason why they're on the peonies is, why do we like desserts? They're sweet. Well, when peonies are still in the bud shape and they haven't opened, they do secrete a sticky, sweet substance that the ants are very attracted to. For them, it's dessert. It's not true that the peonies only open because of the ants, but the ants will be there because they want a sweet tasting syrup. In terms of bringing them in the house when the peonies are in bloom, an easy solution is when you cut the peonies, you just submerge the blossoms into a bucket of water, leave it for a second or two, and then pull it out and give it a shake. When the peony blossoms go into the water, if there are any ants in the bloom, they immediately will go to the top of the bloom because they don't want to drown. So by shaking it, they're at the ends of the blossoms and the ends of the petals, so they'll just fall off. So that's an easy way of dealing with them. Now, fertilizing. Peonies are heavy feeders. So they do like well-rotted manure, compost, alfalfa pellets, fish emulsion. And when you put it around the peony, as this illustrates, you don't put it where the stems are. You put it out maybe about an inch or two from the stems, because you want the fertilizer to go into the ground and not be where the stems are, because it can burn them and they can rot. One of the things that we've begun to do in Osceola is we use Epsom salts and blackstrap molasses. Now, we don't do this when we're fertilizing the garden in general. We use this when we are planting or transplanting peonies into the ground. Because the Epsom salts and the blackstrap molasses, what they do is they get the white fiber roots to grow. And so we've tried this to sort of see their impact on the growth of peonies over the years. It hasn't hurt them. Some have done very well, others do just as the others do. So it's sort of a little bit this, a little bit that, but it's something that we've continued to do. We use alfalfa pellets and we put them on the, just on the soil and let the rain dissolve them and sink into the soil. Now, two ways that you can reproduce peonies. Excuse me, I have to stand up and turn on the light. One is by division. Now, if you have a Sarah Bernhardt or a Festiva Maxa or an Alini Bell, and you want an exact plant, you want that plant, you have to divide the peony in order to get that particular plant. However, the stamens do produce seeds. So the stamens in the photograph on the left are the ones with the red tips. And they eventually will develop into seeds, which are in the right, the black seeds, not the red seeds. The red seeds are immature, the black seeds. Excuse me. However, unless you are a hybridizer who controls population, controls pollination, excuse me, and peonies, the bees go here, they go there. So you never know. You know which is the mother plant, but you never know which is the father. So by germinating the seeds, you will get a unique plant, a plant that will have the genes of the mother or some of the traits of the mother and the traits of the father, but you do not know what the father is. So it's always kind of a surprise. So as I said here, to get the exact same peony, you have to dig and divide the roots. So what you see here is a mass of roots, and not all peonies have this structure, but this is the most common one that you see for herbaceous peonies. And what you do is you can take a shovel and you cut into down the center. You can kind of look at it and sort of see where it would be possible to get a shovel or a Japanese knife, which Lee Valley sells, and cut down between the stems down into the roots. So what you want to do is, in this case, in this photograph, the eyes of the peony, which is next year's growth, are the white shoots that you see down sort of towards the crown. The ideal situation is to have 3 to 5 eyes per division. Peonies do not like to be dug up and then merely have it all transplanted in a hole. Peonies can be very temperamental. They can sulk like children. And if they're unhappy and they sulk, you'll notice it. So by dividing it, you're actually encouraging the plant to increase in size. What we recommend is with these roots, you trim them, the very thick ones towards the bottom and the midway point that you see, the long sort of carrot-like roots. You trim them. And then on those, you trim off these white fibrous roots that are the feeder roots. And that's when you plant them. Now, one thing is often when the seeds drop and you don't pick them up, seedlings will appear. And this is what you'll find. For example, the photograph here, there's a Quebec hybridizer who's now deceased called Menard. And he developed a series of peonies that are very vigorous. His most famous one, I don't know if you've heard about it, it's called Adrian Clarkson. The Canadian Peony Society in the early 90s had a show, or in 2000, had a show at Rideau Hall when Adrian Clarkson was the Governor General. And they presented her with a Menard seedling named after her. She chose the actual flower. So there's a botanist here in Ottawa, and you may remember her from Radio Noon when they had the garden call-in show. Sometimes she'd be on. These are seedlings that she has created from the Menard peonies. So I suspect that the ones on the right, which are sort of a cream pink, are probably the parent was originally, the mother plant was originally Adrian Clarkson. Now, peonies do require a period of cold dormancy. That's why when I was talking earlier and saying that they do not grow in warmer climates, they do require cold dormancy. So they're actually suited well to Canadian winters and Canadian climate. So Danielle mentioned our Second Empire schoolhouse. This is it in the background here. And this is some of our peony gardens that we have there. Somebody said to me, well, you said peonies are other colors than white, red, and pink. How come there's so many red, white, and pink in this garden? And it's true, there are. And the reason why is because the school was built in 1898. And so we were initially purchasing peonies that were developed around that period. So the other thing is, again, this year has been an interesting year because in early April, we had that very warm weather. And as Mary Ann can testify, so many people were sending questions to master gardeners or to the Ottawa Horticultural Society, you know, can I plant now and that sort of thing. Our springs are often cold and wet. And this can have an effect on peonies. Now, I've noticed this year, even with the snow and the cold temperatures, the peonies seem to have done okay. But I have found in Osceola, the species peonies and some of the early Saunders, if you have a particularly cold spring, as we had last year, the foliage can curl. However, even though that happens, they seem to come back very quickly. It does mean occasionally, because of their early blooming and the bud stage is further advanced, that they will blast the buds. So now, just in closing, I wanted to give you some interesting peony websites. There is a site, I'm not sure if you're aware of it, called Dr. Karsten Burkhardt's Peony Web Project. And if you come across a peony and you don't know anything about it, if you Google Dr. Karsten Berkhold's Peony project or database, or you can use this www.paeo.da site, you will have a huge array of named peonies. It's very easy to work. What happens is the alphabet comes up. If you know, say, for example, Lini Bell, you open it on I, and then so you have a red I, you have all the letters in red, and then you have a series of small letters in blue. So for example, if you're looking up a Lini Bell, you do the capital I, and then you go to the lowercase l, and it'll open up a list of all the peonies that start with IL. It's an amazing project, and it's an amazing source of information. The DE stands for Denmark. However, he does not do it anymore. And the American Peony Society have taken it on, although my understanding is they have not kept it up as much. But still, it's an incredible source. I have found on Dr. Karsten's site that the photographs aren't always accurate, but the description is very good. There's also a Peony forum, and you can see the HTTP site for that at thegardenweb.com. And also there's a lot more information on peonies at the Canadian Peony Society website, which is www.peony.ca. What was I going to say about that? Also on the Canadian Peony website is a list of peonies, peony vendors. And so Canadian peony vendors, and it'll give you, their website where you can go on and you can look at their catalogs. The time to order peonies from catalogs is in the spring. Because generally what happens is people order them for the fall, delivery is in the fall. So you have to go on to the Peony websites if you want to order early. Peonies, herbaceous peonies range anywhere from $35 to $45. I know you can get them cheaper at the garden centers or Walmart, for example. Itoh peonies and tree peonies are more expensive. And the rarer the peony, the more expensive it is if you go onto the websites. But for a long time, there were a number of peony vendors, many of whom have retired. But however, a new generation has come on and is now sort of starting to offer them for sale. So that's a good source. So the Canadian Peony Society was founded in 1998 to promote peonies. It's an interesting membership because it's both novice and experienced gardeners. The American Peony Society is really largely American breeders and sellers of peonies. So the two societies are actually quite different. We have annual, regional, and national flower shows. There's a BC Peony Society in Castlegar. There's one in Regina. There's one in Oshawa. There's one in Quebec. There's none in Ottawa, the Ottawa region. And there's, I don't think there's one now in the Maritimes. But with the flower shows, because of COVID, they're not sort of, they've gone viral. So they've changed a bit. But of course, everybody is hoping, that 2022 will allow the national shows to recommence. The Canadian Peony Society also has an annual root sale, which actually, if you want to find unusual peonies, it's a good thing. You have to be a member. Membership is not expensive, but you can put in a bid or put in your name to get a peony root. And it's done by lottery. Basically, they pull names depending upon how many divisions there are. There's also a seed exchange as well. So if you want more information on the Canadian Peony Society, it's at www.cpsc.ca. www.peony.ca. Now, I just want to end by talking about some of the famous peony gardens in Ottawa. There is a central experimental farm on the Prince of Wales Drive. The peony gardens are very close to the traffic circle on Prince of Wales, and they have the largest collection of Percy Saunders peonies in North America. There's the Oshawa Valley Botanical Gardens in Oshawa, which is a very beautiful garden. There's the Royal Horticultural Garden in Burlington, and the Montreal Botanical Garden in Montreal. There's also Jardin Roger Vendin in Laval near Quebec City, and a Jardin de Métis, which is also known as Reeford Gardens in the Gaspé, as well as the Calgary Zoo. I just realized there's another one down near Brantford. Whistling Gardens is another one as well. So here are some of the different suppliers that I took from an earlier version of the website, and I should have updated this this list. Blossom Hill is good. Their offerings this year, I noticed, are substantially smaller. There's the Peony World near Bowmanville, White House Perennials near Almont, Dutch Girl Peonies in BC, Pibuan Capano in Chicoutimi, and there is also Parkland Perennials, which is in Calgary. It's a long established peony supplier. However, it changed hands about 4 years ago, and but they're back up and running with a new young man taking care of it. So I'm just going to show you a few photographs. This is from Jardin de Métis or Reeford Gardens. It's the Peony Walk. This is the experimental farm at its peak. The peonies at the experimental farm start around May 24th, and the peak is around the 6th to the 10th of July. This is also an artist painting the peony gardens at the experimental farm. And these are some of our peony gardens. You can't really see them. There's 2 here, and then there's 8 of them in the back. In the early spring. So our peak period for peonies in Osceola is June 16th week. So that's it, I believe. Well, no, there's another one of our gardens during the blooming period. If you have any questions, I'd be very happy to answer any questions you have.
Do we have any questions for Blaine?
Yes, I have a question, Judy. Hi, I notice you don't have, I was wondering if you have irrigation. I notice you don't use a lot of mulch.
Nope. No, we have so many gardens that having mulch would take a long time to put on. I weed them by hand, and I'm now getting close to 72, and I'm finding it a rather tiring thing to do, but no, I do them by hand. We have about a 300-foot hose that I lug around the gardens and just put them on. And I generally irrigate them for about an hour or about 45 minutes per gardens. So I can do 2 gardens at once. And I just basically, to do all the gardens in Osceola takes an entire weekend. So now the thing, because you asked about mulch, with mulch, you have to be careful around peonies. You don't put the mulch close to the stems. You leave space. Okay, that's very important, because what will happen is you will get rot.
Okay.
So it's important. Air circulation is very important.
Okay.
You know, so mulch is a good idea. I mean, if I had a small garden, although my gardens here in Ottawa are smaller, and I don't use mulch here, but you can use mulch, but just be careful.
So back to the irrigation, you would only do that when it gets extremely dry in July?
Yeah, and
August?
actually, yeah, you know, peonies are quite drought
Yeah.
tolerant once they get established.
Yeah.
However, last year we had the drought, and I did notice it did affect the blooming. There were two things that happened last year.
Yes.
We had a cold, wet spring,
Right.
so the flowering wasn't as floriferous as it normally is. And the drought was, as it dragged on, it really had an impact on the peonies. And then we had a heavy rain and they just bounced back. So,
Yeah.
you know, but generally I tell people, if you want to water a garden, water once a week for a longer period of time, and the garden will do well. You know?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Blaine, a question from Pat Allen.
Yeah.
Are fernleaf peonies a different species?
Well, fern leaf are a species peony. So they're not a different. They're different in that there's many kinds of, they're different kinds of fern leaf. And what has happened is, if you remember the photographs I had, which was wind chimes and early scout, they are not a species peony. They're herbaceous peony, but they've been crossed. So for wind chimes and early scout, and there's others, Peter Bar, different ones, they have inherited from the mother plant the fern leaf appearance, but they're not a species peony, they're herbaceous peony. So the fern leaf itself is actually a species peony, but when it was crossed, it created these herbaceous peonies that have the fern-like leaf. Is that clear? Or?
I think so.
Yeah.
Stephanie has her hand up. Stephanie, can you unmute to ask your question?
Can I just, sorry, can I just, the tennifolia is a species peony. It's the one with the fern leaf. However, with the herbaceous peony, they're not really, I don't think they're called tennifolia, they're called fern leaf. So anyway, there's another question.
Yes, I was just wondering if they like that mic root inoculant when they're planted or separated.
I would suspect they do.
Uh-huh.
I use mic more for trees.
Just
I mean,
wondering, Ed Lawrence is always promoting the use of mics. So.
Yeah. But I mean, it's the same as using the Epsom salts, I think. You know, it's a stimulant. And it helps with the transplant as well. So
Thanks.
I do always keep a container of mic in Osceola, but I use it mostly for trees.
Well, mycorrhiza, which is what Mike's is naturally occurring. So if you've got good, healthy soil, you probably already have it in there. Especially if you inoculate some plants, because it's going to grow and spread.
Yeah. I didn't actually talk about that. When you're planting a peony, you have to make sure that the hole is large enough, wide enough, and deep enough. And so it should be about 2 inches deeper than the root itself that you're planting. And if you want, because often people say, can I use manure or compost? If you're using manure, what is recommended is you dig the hole a little bit deeper, put in the manure, and then put 1 inch or 2 of soil, and then put the peony root, so that the peony root is not in contact with the manure. And the other thing that you have to do is when you're planting those roots, you don't want to leave air pockets. So what you do is when you're planting it, make sure you're getting earth in around the thick roots so that there are no air pockets. Because what will happen is if we have a heavy rain, the water will sit in those pockets and it can cause rot of the roots. So you just have to make sure. And again, the eyes, which are the little buds on the crown, should be 2 inches below the soil surface.
The tree peonies, when you say to plant them 4 inches below the, like the graft 4
Yeah.
inches below, does that stop the suckering from the?
No,
No, no.
well, it does generally, but I had a tree peony in my backyard here in Ottawa for 20 years. And last summer I went out and there was a shoot.
Yeah, I've got
And
some I just noticed
I've
today.
never had a shoot before, you know.
Yeah.
But you just really have to just remove them. Like, don't be tempted and say, oh, wait and see what happens. It's important to remove them so that the strength remains in the tree peony and not in the herbaceous,
Yeah.
you know.
And Itoh peonies are sterile, correct?
Yes, yeah, generally they are, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I helped somebody dig up an Itoh peony, and it was really hard to do.
Yeah.
You know, because the roots I showed were kind of like this, see, you know, like this. But there are peonies that have more of a taproot, and they grow quite large, and they are very difficult to divide, you know. So the general herbaceous peonies, where the roots are kind of like this, are really easy. In fact, sometimes if you just rock them back and forth, they come apart. And you don't even have to slice them. If you just move them very gradually, they come apart. So it's another way that you can do it, you know.
And I was trying to divide or take a section off my Illini Warrior, and I found it to be very brittle.
Yeah.
Is that normal?
Yeah. Yeah. Some peonies are, they are very brittle, very, very brittle. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It is a problem. I mean, we also grow peonies in pots, which I shouldn't really be doing, but we have so many peonies. And of course, because we donate to the Peony Society, so we dig up a plant and we end up with, say, 10 divisions, and we'll give 5, but we'll keep 5. So we pot them up, right? And sometimes I have found, even though the foliage looks very, very good on some of them, when you take them out of the pot, the roots are very brittle, you know. So it's something, I don't know, I guess I haven't studied peonies enough to know all the ins and outs of, you know, which peonies have tap roots and which ones have different kinds of roots, or why some get powdery mildew and others don't, you know. So but they're a long-lasting flower, and you know, when you talk to people, they really evoke childhood memories. It's really amazing. Like when I showed that about grandma's peonies, it's amazing how many people say to me, my grandmother had them, or my mother had them, or, you know, I dug up a clump from because we sold my mother's house or my grandmother's house, and I wanted to keep them, you know. So they're a very emotional and evocative flower, I find, for people. You know.
Okay. Are there any more questions for Blaine? I don't see any more in the chat. There's just a comment here. Beautiful gardens. Very impressed you do it all by hand.
It's called obsessive compulsive.
Hello, Marianne.
Hello.
Yes.
It's Joan Sands. Did Blaine speak on heritage peonies? I missed the beginning.
Well, heritage peonies are really the ones that were bred in the 1800s and early 1900s. And it's peonies like Sarah Bernhardt or Festiva Maxima that have been very famous. And those peonies are very fragrant, but they were originally bred as cut flowers, which is why they flop over. So is that what you mean by heritage, that type of peony? Or are you talking about some of the peonies that were originally brought from China, which tend to be the species peonies or the tree peonies?
Well, I'm not quite sure. I was raised on a farm, and my mother had that she called a heritage peony, and it was almost wine colored. It was so dark, and it was a looser flower with big stamens in the middle. And she always called it but it didn't grow very tall.
Mhm. Yeah, peonies, actually, that's a good point. Peonies can be different sizes. For example, somebody was asking about the fern leaf. Well, the tenifolia, the fern leaf peonies that, such as wind chimes and early scout, are not large at all. They're quite small compared to the others. You know, because peonies can grow quite large. They can grow 3 or 4 feet.
Yes.
But I'd have to think about that, because it's obviously not red charm, which is another older one. I'd have to think about the deep red, because generally the peonies are, the older fashioned ones are white and pink. But I have to think about some of the red ones, you know.
Thank you very much. Yes, we just wanted to protect this particular one.
Do you have a photograph of it?
No. Oh, well, I might be able to find one.
And do you know can you identify which week it blooms in?
No, not in particular. I can't. I was looking on my phone, and one that sort of looks like it is that Carl Rosenfield peony.
That's right. Okay, that's probably what it is. Yes, that's an old-fashioned one. Yes, although it's not 1800. I think that one was developed in the 1900s.
It's just a very dark red, and then
yes.
Yeah, Mom had the tall white ones, pink ones, white and pink ones. Yeah. Thank you very much, sir. It's been wonderful.
Okay.
Well, I think that wraps up the questions for Blaine today. Blaine, thanks very much for sharing the storied past of one of my favorite flowers. You've given us a wealth of information and the motivation to plant peonies in our gardens this fall. Again, thank you for taking the time to speak to our members, and all the best in your poetry and prose.
If people want to go out for a drive, I realize now we're not supposed to, but maybe, I don't know, maybe after the lockdown ends, because peony season will be later than the May 20th that sort of the government has said. You know, if you go to a peony garden, you can see the different kinds of peonies and see which ones they like. For example, at the experimental farm, they have, not all of them, I keep pushing for this, they have tags that will say which peony it is. You know, so it's a good way to see what you like and what you would like to have.
Okay, Blaine. Well, thanks.
Okay. Well, I hope it was helpful.
You are you're free to leave, but I'd like to speak to the members on a few administrative matters. So we appreciated your talk. It was very interesting.
Okay. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. Be well.
Thank you, Blaine.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I have about 5 or 6 little announcements I'd like to make. And the first one I'd like to start with is I'm putting in an urgent plea for a new treasurer. We can't function without a treasurer. Marianne has been doing it far too long. It is time for someone else to step up and volunteer to help. This could be one person or a small team to take care of all the tasks. So please think about it and let me know if you can help. Today was the wrap-up date for the floral design competition. Thanks to those who entered. I was a little bit disappointed in the number of entries. I had hoped to receive more entries, but perhaps next time we'll have more. So we will soon be issuing a communique asking members to vote on your favorite entry. So stay tuned. Thirdly, given the extended lockdown, the plant sale committee is considering pushing the date of the plant sale into early June. So the committee is developing a plan, and further details will be communicated soon. Fourthly, if you're interested in ordering fertilizer from the Bath Garden Club, please get your order in to Gabrielle Scheller. Sorry, Gabrielle, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Gabrielle Scheller.
I'm sorry?
Gabrielle Scheller.
Scheller, okay. By the 28th. Her email address can be found in the yearbook or in the communique that went out on April the 19th. And thank you very much, Gabrielle, for agreeing to coordinate our order. Our next virtual speaker event is on Monday, the 24th of May. We have a physiotherapist joining us for a talk on gardening without pain. And right after that presentation, we're holding a special meeting asking the membership to vote on a resolution to add a new article to our current constitution, including the ability to hold electronic meetings beyond May the 31st. So please do plan to attend. Your vote is important. Lastly, thanks to Marianne, our Zoom meeting coordinator, and thanks to everyone for tuning in. Members can expect a few more communiques in the next several weeks because we have a lot of information to communicate in a condensed period of time. So to all, stay safe and happy gardening.
Thank you, Danielle.